Hello, Pioneer viewers. We continue to bring you the most noteworthy events unfolding in the shadow of war. The Russia-Ukraine war is leaving deep scars not only on the front lines but also in the daily lives of communities. Now we are faced with a picture that perhaps most strikingly reveals the destructive effects of war. People in Russia have begun to leave the country, drawing attention with kilometer-long queues forming especially at the Ukrainian border. These developments show that the war is now directly determining not only the front lines, but also people's life choices. The fact that citizens, especially those living in border areas, are forming long queues to leave the country with only a few belongings they can take with them points to the seriousness of the economic collapse and the endless atmosphere of war. Border crossings, once a normal part of daily life, have now become an escape route filled with despair and uncertainty. The fact that people have no choice but to immigrate clearly reveals the devastating effects of Russia's economic troubles and the ongoing war on the social psyche. On the other hand, this wave of migration could be seen not only as an individual choice, but as a concrete reflection of the political and economic crisis facing the country. Economic decline, unemployment, inflation, and the uncertainty of war are making the Russian people feel hopeless in their own land. So, what exactly lies behind this desperation that is driving the Russian people to abandon their homeland? Let's take a look at the developments together. We need your support to produce detailed content about the Russia-Ukraine war. You can provide this by clicking the like button and leaving a comment. Also, don't forget, when mentioning and leaving a comment, to tell us what kind of content you would like to see on our channel. The unrest on the Ukrainian border reveals the extent of the economic and political crisis Russia has fallen into. The miles-long lines of vehicles and border crossings in recent days point to a reality beyond Moscow's control. The Russian people are leaving their own country. With each passing day of the war, the Kremlin's losses on both the military and economic fronts have deeply shaken public confidence. The shrinking economy under the pressure of sanctions, rising unemployment, shortages of basic consumer goods, and increasingly heavy political pressure have left millions of Russian citizens with the choice of stay and perish or flee. Russians living in areas close to the Ukrainian border in particular have been forced to leave their homes as the front line approaches and security risks increase. People who have been waiting for days at checkpoints on the Russia-Ukraine border are setting off into uncertainty with just a few suitcases they can carry. The scene at the border crossings resembles a wave of immigration. Families, children, elderly people, some are trying to cross into Europe through Ukraine, while others are heading for Georgia, Kazakhstan, and the Baltic states. Images shared on social media show people waiting at border crossings until dawn, families queuing in tents, and children struggling with hunger. The Kremlin is trying to deny these developments. State television channels are ordered to label those leaving the country as traitors, but the reality is clearly visible at the border crossings. The impact of the economic collapse on the people is being felt more and more every day. The ruble has suffered historic losses in value in recent months. Imported goods have almost completely disappeared from supermarket shelves, while domestic production is far from meeting demand. The crisis in the automotive sector has already largely devastated the middle class. People are now forced to sell even their used cars at astronomical prices. Rising gasoline and food prices have made daily life unbearable for ordinary citizens. One of the most talked about issues among the public right now is unemployment. While finding a job has become nearly impossible even in large cities, the situation is much more dire for people living in border regions. This migration is not solely due to economic reasons. The heavy losses suffered in the war in Ukraine have also undermined the morale of Russian society. There is a huge gap between the official casualty figures announced by the Kremlin and the actual figures coming from the battlefield. Russian families see that their young men who were drafted are not returning or are returning with serious injuries. People living in rural areas in particular live in fear that my child will never return. For this reason, many families are leaving their homes to avoid being dragged into the war. A woman speaking at the border says tearfully, "We don't believe in this war. I don't want to send my child to the front. It's no longer possible to live here. We are leaving everything behind, but at least we hope to find freedom and security." These words sum up the shared feelings of millions of Russian citizens. Russia's diplomatic pressure on neighboring countries is also making it difficult for people to immigrate. It is reported that crossings at the Georgian border are restricted and that the Baltic countries have suspended visa procedures at some points. However, despite all these obstacles, people are not giving up on finding escape routes because staying in the country now means greater danger for them. It is a fact that Turkey is also being closely monitored during this process. In particular, the number of Russian citizens attempting to cross into Turkey through the Black Sea is increasing. Some of those reaching Istanbul and Ankara plan to cross into Europe from there, while others are trying to build a new life in Turkey. However, the increasing wave of immigration has become a serious topic of debate for both neighboring countries and Europe. This mass immigration crisis experienced by the Kremlin actually shows that Russia has lost on another front, because wars are not only won on the battlefield with tanks and artillery. The moment you lose the support of the people, you actually start to lose the war. The current situation in Russia reflects this reality. No matter how powerful the state's propaganda is, the presence of tens of thousands of people waiting at the border gates weakens the Kremlin's hand. This wave of immigration is expected to grow in the coming period. As winter approaches, rising unemployment combined with the energy crisis will make living conditions even more difficult for the Russian people. This will bring new immigration routes and new border crossing crises. The international community has already begun discussing the consequences of this large-scale immigration. European countries are assessing the possibility of facing a new refugee crisis, that is. This picture, emerging in the shadow of the Russia-Ukraine war, points not only to a military conflict, but also to a major social fracture. The long queues at border crossings, families desperately abandoning their homes, and the lives left behind clearly reveal how the Kremlin's war policies are inflicting deep wounds within the country. So, what do you think? How might this wave of immigration shape Russia's future? Is it possible for a government that has lost public support to continue the war? Share your thoughts below. We read and value your points of view.